I've been an EMT for nearly a decade and I thought I'd seen it all. But there's one night that still haunts me, something that never should have happened. It started like any other shift with the usual calls, overdoses, car crashes, heart attacks. But then, around 3 a.m., we got a call from dispatch about a car accident on a rural road just outside of town. The voice on the other end sounded strained, like they were holding back fear. Single vehicle accident. No details on occupants. Proceed with caution. We arrived at the scene to find a car wrapped around a tree. The front was crumpled, the windshield shattered, and there was steam hissing from under the hood. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the fog made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. My partner Jake and I grabbed our gear and ran toward the wreck. I reached the driver's side first. The door was open, but the car was empty. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, calling out, "Hello, is anyone there?" No response, just the distant rumble of thunder. Jake went around to the passenger side and checked the back seat. "Nothing here," he called. We glanced around the road, the surrounding woods, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the silence and the rain. Then I saw her, a woman, standing in the tree line, maybe 20 yards away. She was wearing a white dress, soaked through, and her hair clung to her face in thick, dark strands. She was just standing there, staring at us. "Ma'am," I called, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't move. I could feel my heart starting to race. Something wasn't right. I took another step forward, and that's when I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing in my ear. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the car, Jake, and the rain. When I turned back to the woman, she was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaky. "The woman in the woods?" Jake frowned. "What woman?" I pointed to where she had been, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. "She was right there," I insisted. Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Maybe you're seeing things, man. Let's check out the car again." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I nodded. We walked back to the car, and that's when we heard it. A soft, muffled cry coming from the trunk. We both froze, exchanged a look, and then hurried to the back of the car. The trunk was slightly ajar. I grabbed the edge and lifted it, and there, curled up in a ball, was a woman, her eyes wide with terror. Her hands were tied, her mouth gagged. She looked exactly like the woman I had seen in the woods. Same white dress, same dark hair. Jake and I jumped into action, quickly freeing her and calling for backup. As we worked to calm her down, I couldn't stop shaking. Once she could speak, she told us her name was Sarah. She'd been kidnapped and stuffed in the trunk of her own car. She had no idea who had done it or why. She just kept repeating, "Thank you for finding me." But I couldn't get the image of the woman in the woods out of my head. Later, I checked the dashcam footage from our ambulance. The camera was aimed right at the spot where I'd seen her standing. There was nothing there, nothing at all. Being an EMT means you have to deal with all sorts of things. Some make sense, some don't. It was a quiet night shift, unusually calm. My partner Megan and I were parked at the usual spot, grabbing a quick coffee, when the call from dispatch came in. Cardiac arrest. Child, age 7. Address is 14 Whitaker Lane. A chill ran down my spine. I knew that address. Everyone in town knew it. The house had been abandoned for years. Rumor had it a little girl died there, but no one knew for sure. I glanced at Megan, who looked equally uneasy. We raced to the location, sirens blaring. The house was dark and dilapidated, the windows boarded up, the front yard overgrown with weeds. We jumped out of the ambulance, grabbing our bags. There were no lights on, no sign of anyone inside. "Hello!" I called out as we approached the front door. "Is anyone there?" No answer. Megan shined her flashlight through a crack in the boards. "This doesn't feel right," she muttered. But a call was a call. We pushed the door open, stepping into the dark, dusty hallway. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. We could hear faint sobbing from upstairs, a child's voice trembling and scared. We exchanged a look and headed up the creaking stairs. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate. "Help me, please," the voice whimpered. My heart was pounding in my chest. At the top of the stairs we found a small bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, and there, sitting in the middle of the room, was a little girl. She was wearing a faded pink dress, her blonde hair tangled and dirty. Her face was streaked with tears. "Hey there," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're here to help you, okay?" She looked up at me, her big blue eyes filled with fear. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered. "Can you help me find her?" Megan stepped forward, crouching down to her level. "Of course, sweetie. What's your name?" "Lily," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Lily, let's get you out of here and we'll find your mommy." "All right," I said, reaching out my hand. As soon as I touched her, the room grew ice cold. I felt a pressure on my chest, like something was squeezing the air out of my lungs. I glanced at Megan. Her eyes were wide, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Then Lily started to laugh. A soft, chilling giggle that made my skin crawl. "You're not going to find her," she sang. "She's never coming back." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and for a moment the room seemed to change. The walls were stained with something dark, and the air was filled with the scent of burning wood. "Let's go," Megan whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, backing toward the door, but when I looked back, Lily was gone. The room was empty. The temperature was back to normal. We ran down the stairs, burst out of the front door, and jumped into the ambulance. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. Megan was white as a sheet, staring straight ahead. We reported the incident to dispatch, but no one else was sent. They just told us to return to base. A few days later, I looked up the records on the house. A family had lived there years ago. The daughter, Lily, went missing, and the mother, in her grief, set the house on fire, killing herself in the process. Lily was never found. I've never been back to that house, and I never want to, but sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear that little girl's laugh echoing in my mind. I've always thought of myself as pretty level-headed, even in the most intense situations. But there's one call I'll never forget. It was the middle of winter, and we were responding to a 911 call about a possible overdose in an old apartment building downtown. We'd been there before, lots of transient folks. Some drug use, nothing out of the ordinary. We arrived at the building, and the landlord met us at the door. "Third floor," he said, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Apartment 304. I heard him screaming, but it just stopped. We hurried up the narrow staircase, the smell of mildew and something sour growing stronger with every step. We reached the third floor and found the door to 304 slightly open. I pushed it open with my shoulder, and we stepped inside. The apartment was freezing cold, the windows covered in frost. The only light came from a single, flickering bulb in the ceiling. There in the middle of the living room was a man sprawled on his back. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling, and his mouth was moving, like he was trying to say something, but no sound was coming out. His skin was pale, almost blue, like he'd been out in the cold for too long. My partner, Alex, knelt down beside him, checking for a pulse. "He's ice cold," he muttered. "No pulse, no breathing." We started CPR, the usual routine, but something felt off. As I pressed down on his chest, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind howling through the cracked windows, but it grew louder. It was coming from him. His lips were moving, but the sound that escaped was nothing like a human voice. It was more like a raspy, inhuman hiss. I paused for a second, trying to make sense of it. "Alex, do you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Alex nodded, his face tense. "Yeah, but it doesn't make any sense. This guy's not breathing, man." I continued with the compressions, but the whispering grew louder, more urgent. It was like a dozen voices speaking all at once, overlapping and frantic. I leaned closer, trying to make out what they were saying, and that's when I realized the man's eyes had shifted. They weren't staring blankly at the ceiling anymore. They were looking straight at me, and his mouth was moving faster now, the whispering turning into a low, guttural chant. "Stop! Stop!" the voices seemed to say, overlapping in a chilling chorus. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I looked at Alex, but he was focused, oblivious to the shift. "We need to call this in," I said, my voice trembling, but Alex shook his head. "Not yet. We have to keep trying." Reluctantly, I continued the compressions, but the man's lips began to curl into a twisted smile, and the whispering grew louder still, almost deafening. It was like 100 different voices were screaming all at once. Then suddenly he sat up. His body, which should have been lifeless, sprang upright with a jolt, his eyes wide and staring straight through me. He grabbed my arm with a strength that no dead man should possess. His skin was icy, his grip like a vice. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as he leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "Get out," he whispered, his voice now clear, cold, and unmistakably human. "Get out while you still can." Then he collapsed, his grip loosening, and his body hit the floor with a sickening thud. I stumbled back, heart racing, staring in disbelief. "What the hell just happened?" Alex muttered, looking as shaken as I felt. "I don't know," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "I don't know." We checked his vitals again. Nothing. No pulse, no breath, no sign of life. He was cold, stone cold, like he'd been dead for hours. But how could that be? How had he just sat up like that? I grabbed the radio, my hands shaking. "Dispatch, we need backup at 304 Main Street, 3rd floor. Possible DOA, but..." Something's not right here. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, sounding oddly distorted. Backup! Already! There! What does that mean? Alex asked, frowning. I didn't have a chance to respond. A loud, heavy knock came from the door. We both jumped, turning toward the sound. The door was closed now. When had it closed? And the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Bang! 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 I took a step toward it, hand outstretched. Who's there? I called. But there was no answer, just the relentless pounding. I glanced back at Alex and he nodded. I reached for the doorknob, turned it slowly, and pulled the door open. No one was there. The hallway was empty, dark, and silent. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned back toward the room, and that's when I saw it. The man was gone. The body that had been lying there just moments before was nowhere to be seen. What? Where did he go? Alex stammered, his face pale. I couldn't answer. I felt like the walls were closing in, the shadows growing darker. I stepped back into the hallway, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then I heard it. A whisper right in my ear, so close it sent shivers down my spine. You should have listened. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just Alex staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. We need to get out of here, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Alex nodded, and we bolted for the stairs, not looking back. We didn't stop until we were outside, the cold night air hitting our faces like a slap. We jumped into the ambulance, slamming the doors shut, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. I grabbed the radio again. Dispatch, we need backup at 304 Main Street. Please respond. The radio crackled to life, and this time the voice was clear. 304 Main Street? That building was demolished years ago. There's nothing there but rubble. My blood ran cold. I looked at Alex, who stared back at me, eyes wide with fear. We were parked right in front of it. The building stood there, clear as day. But in that moment, as I glanced up, I noticed the windows were all dark and shattered, like no one had lived there in years. We didn't speak for the rest of the shift. We just drove, trying to make sense of what had just happened, knowing that whatever it was, we'd never go back there again. But sometimes, late at night when I'm on a quiet call or driving through those dark, empty streets, I think about that whisper. I think about the man's eyes staring right through me. And I wonder if the dead really can speak, and if they do, what it is they're trying to say.